Elderly man takes in pregnant street cat during storm. 3 months later, something incredible changes. The grandfather clock in Ralph Henderson's living room struck 8, its resonant chimes echoing through the empty house. He sat in his worn leather armchair, the one Martha had always said needed replacing, but he couldn't bring himself to part with it. The evening news droned on the television, more background noise than entertainment, while rain pelted against the windows with increasing intensity. 72 years had given Ralph enough experience to recognize when a storm meant business, and this one wasn't fooling around. October in New England had always been unpredictable, but tonight's weather seemed particularly savage. The wind howled through the eaves of his colonial-style home, the same house where he and Martha had raised their children, celebrated countless Christmases, and grown old together. Well, at least until 3 years ago. Ralph adjusted his reading glasses and tried to focus on the crossword puzzle in his lap, a nightly ritual that helped keep his mind sharp. Martha had always been better at these, especially the literature clues. 7 letters, Dickens' orphan, he muttered to himself. Oliver, he answered after a moment, allowing himself a small smile. Martha would have gotten that one immediately. A sound cut through the storm's cacophony, something between a cry and a meow. Ralph lowered his newspaper, cocking his head to listen. There it was again, more distinct this time. He hadn't owned a cat since Whiskers, back when the kids were in elementary school, but he recognized a feline in distress when he heard one. With a grunt, Ralph pushed himself up from his chair, his joints protesting the sudden movement. The hardwood floors creaked beneath his slippers as he made his way to the front door. The crying grew louder, more insistent. When he opened the door, the wind nearly yanked it from his grasp. There, huddled against the storm door, was a cat, soaked to the bone and obviously pregnant. Her fur, what he could see of it through the wet mess, appeared to be a mixture of gray and white, but it was her eyes that caught his attention. Bright green and filled with an intelligence that reminded him of Martha's knowing gaze. "Well now," Ralph said, his voice rough from disuse. "You've picked quite a night for visiting, haven't you?" The cat meowed again, this time softer, almost pleading. Ralph felt something shift inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, the urge to protect, to care for something beyond himself. "Martha would never forgive me if I left you out here," he muttered, opening the storm door carefully. The cat didn't hesitate, darting inside with surprising agility despite her condition. She left small puddles in her wake as she followed Ralph to the kitchen, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Ralph's hands shook slightly as he opened a can of tuna fish, the only thing he could think of that might appeal to a cat. It had been years since he'd needed to care for anyone but himself, and the simple act of preparing food for another living creature felt foreign yet somehow right. "You'll have to excuse the bachelor accommodations," he told the cat as he placed the tuna in a small bowl. "I wasn't exactly expecting company." The cat approached the bowl cautiously, then began to eat with obvious hunger. Ralph found himself smiling as he watched her, remembering how Martha would always feed the neighborhood strays, much to his former protests. "You need a name," he said, pulling out a kitchen chair and easing himself into it. "Can't just keep calling you Cat." The feline paused in her meal, looking up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "Lady," he decided, "you carry yourself like one, even in this state." Lady returned to her meal and Ralph found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in months. He told her about Martha, about their 50 years together, about the kids who now lived too far away with families of their own. He talked about the loneliness that had become his constant companion, about how the house felt too big and too quiet, especially during storms like this one. Lady finished her meal and began grooming herself, pausing occasionally to look at Ralph as if she were actually listening. Her fur had begun to dry, revealing a lovely silver tabby coat with white paws and chest. The swollen curve of her belly was more apparent now, and Ralph estimated she couldn't have more than a week or 2 before the kittens arrived. "Well, lady," Ralph said, rising slowly from his chair, "I suppose we should find you somewhere comfortable to sleep." can't have you wandering around in your condition." He gathered some old towels from the laundry room and created a makeshift bed in the corner of the kitchen, near the heating vent. To his surprise, Lady followed him through this process, supervising his efforts with what he could have sworn was approval. As Ralph prepared for bed that night, going through his usual routine of checking locks and turning off lights, he realized something had changed. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Lady's presence, though small, had already begun to fill some of the void that Martha's passing had left behind. In bed, listening to the storm rage outside, Ralph heard the soft pat of paws in the hallway, followed by a gentle weight landing on his bed. Lady settled herself at his feet, her purring a soothing counterpoint to the rain. "Martha would like you," Ralph whispered into the darkness. "She always said I needed someone to look after me." He chuckled softly, though I don't think she meant a pregnant cat. As sleep began to overtake him, Ralph felt a warmth in his chest that had been absent for too long. Tomorrow, he'd need to figure out proper food and supplies for his unexpected guest, maybe even call the vet. But for now, he let himself enjoy the simple comfort of sharing his space with another living being. The storm continued its assault on the old house, but inside, something new had begun to take root. A tiny spark of hope, of purpose, of life returning to spaces long left dark and silent. And in the morning, for the first time in years, Ralph Henderson had a reason to get up besides mere habit. He had someone waiting for him, someone who needed him, even if that someone happened to be a pregnant cat named Lady. The following week brought changes to Ralph's life that he hadn't anticipated. His morning routine, once a solitary affair of coffee and crossword puzzles, now included Lady's expectant meows for breakfast and her insistence on being petted while he read the newspaper. He found himself talking more, explaining his daily activities to his attentive feline companion as if she were taking mental notes. "The vet says you're due any day now," Ralph told Lady as he filled her water bowl. The visit to Dr. Williams had been enlightening and expensive, but watching Lady devour the premium cat food he'd bought made it worth every penny. 5 or 6 kittens, she thinks. Lord help me. Lady responded by rubbing against his leg, leaving silver fur on his dark trousers. Ralph found he didn't mind. The house had been too clean anyway, too pristine in its loneliness. Martha had always said a home should look lived in. The thought of Martha prompted Ralph to do something he'd been avoiding for months. He climbed the attic stairs, joints protesting each step, and made his way to the far corner where boxes of memories lay untouched. Took some searching, but he finally found what he was looking for, a large wicker basket that had once held Martha's knitting supplies. "You'll need somewhere proper for those babies," he explained to Lady, who had followed him upstairs and was watching with interest. He lined the basket with soft blankets, positioning it in the corner of his bedroom where Martha's vanity used to stand. Lady inspected his handiwork, stepping in and out of the basket several times before giving what seemed like an approving purr. That evening, as Ralph sat in his armchair watching the news, his cell phone rang. The name on the screen made him sit up straighter. Sarah, his daughter. "Dad." Sarah's voice carried a note of concern. "Mrs. Peterson next door called me. She said she saw you carrying cat supplies into the house. Is everything okay?" Ralph felt a flash of irritation at his neighbor's meddling, but it faded as Lady jumped onto his lap, demanding attention. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I've just taken in a boarder, that's all." There was a pause on the other end. "A boarder? Her name is Lady," Ralph said, scratching behind the cat's ears. "She's expecting kittens soon." "Oh, Dad." Sarah's voice softened. "You always said no more pets after Whiskers." "Well, your mother always wanted another cat." Ralph surprised himself with how easily the words came. Sometimes life sends you what you need, even if you don't know you need it. The conversation that followed was the longest he'd had with Sarah in months. He found himself telling her about Lady's arrival, about the vet visit, about his preparations for the kittens. Sarah listened, occasionally laughing at his descriptions of Lady's imperious behavior. "Maybe we could come visit," Sarah said tentatively. Once the kittens are born, Tommy's been asking about his grandpa, and Emma's old enough to travel now. Ralph felt his throat tighten. I'd like that, sweetheart. I'd like that very much. After hanging up, Ralph sat in his chair, absently stroking Lady's fur. You're causing quite a stir, young lady, he told her. Making me talk to people, spend money, clean up the house. Lady's only response was to purr louder. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Ralph found himself moving furniture to create safe spaces for kittens, buying supplies he never thought he'd need again, and reading articles about cat birth online. His ancient desktop computer, usually used only for email and occasional news reading, now displayed pages about feline maternal care and kitten development. It happened on a Tuesday night. Ralph woke to Lady's insistent pacing and soft cries. Is it time? He asked, fumbling for his glasses. Lady's answer was to head straight for the wicker basket. What followed was both terrifying and miraculous. Ralph sat on the floor beside the basket, offering quiet encouragement as Lady did what nature had prepared her for. He'd called Dr. Williams's emergency number, but the vet had assured him that most cats managed perfectly well on their own. You're doing great, girl, Ralph murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Martha would be so proud of you. By dawn, 6 tiny kittens nestled against their mother's belly. Ralph had witnessed each arrival, counting tiny paws and whiskers, marveling at the perfect miniature faces. 2 silver like their mother, 3 black and white, and 1 orange tabby that had given Lady the most trouble coming into the world. Worth every minute of worry, weren't they? Ralph asked Lady, who looked up at him with exhausted satisfaction. He could have sworn she smiled. Later that morning, Ralph sent a group text to both his children with a photo of Lady and her kittens. His son Michael, who rarely called, rang immediately. Dad, are you running a cat sanctuary now? Michael's attempt at humor couldn't hide his surprise. Just providing a home to those who need it, Ralph replied, watching Lady nurse her babies. Your mother would have done the same. There was a long pause. Yeah, she would have, Michael said softly. Listen, Dad, I'm sorry I haven't called more often. I haven't exactly been reaching out either, Ralph admitted. But maybe we can work on that. As he ended the call, Ralph noticed his reflection in the bedroom mirror. The tired eyes and weathered face were the same, but something had changed. There was a light there that had been missing for too long. Lady called to him with a gentle meow, and Ralph carefully sat on the edge of his bed, close to the basket. Look what you've done, he told her. Filled this old house with life again. Gotten me talking to my kids. Making me buy pet supplies and rearrange furniture. He reached down to stroke her head. Martha always said everyone needs a purpose. I think you might be mine. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting warm light on the basket where new life had just begun. Ralph Henderson, no longer quite so alone, settled in to watch over his expanding family, his heart fuller than it had been in years. 6 weeks had transformed Ralph Henderson's quiet house into something he barely recognized. Where silence once reigned, the patter of tiny paws and playful mewing now filled every corner. The kittens had opened their eyes, found their feet, and proceeded to turn his orderly world completely upside down. Now, see here, Ralph addressed the orange tabby, nicknamed Trouble, who had once again scaled the living room curtains. Those aren't for climbing. But his admonishment held no real reproach. The truth was, he loved every chaotic moment. He'd named each kitten with care. The orange troublemaker, 2 black and white ones he called Socks and Mittens, their more adventurous sister, Patches, and the 2 silver ones, Ghost and Shadow. Lady watched her brood with maternal pride, occasionally shooting Ralph looks that seemed to say, "See what you got yourself into?" The house had changed too. Baby gates blocked off dangerous areas, cat beds occupied strategic corners, and toys littered every surface. Ralph had even set up a kitten playground in the spare room, complete with climbing posts and tunnels. The room that had stood empty since his youngest moved out now echoed with playful squeaks and purrs. Your grandmother would never believe this, Ralph told the kittens as they attacked a feather toy he dangled above them. "She used to say I was too set in my ways." He chuckled, watching Shadow pounce on her siblings. "Guess you proved her wrong." The doorbell rang, sending the kittens scampering for cover. Ralph's heart quickened. Sarah and her family had finally arrived for their promised visit. He opened the door to find his daughter, her husband Jim, and their children, Tommy and Emma. "Grandpa!" 8-year-old Tommy burst past him, while Sarah carefully maneuvered 2-year-old Emma through the door. "Dad?" Sarah's eyes were wide as she took in the transformed living room. "This is different." "Good different," Jim added quickly, noting the new light in his father-in-law's eyes. Tommy had already discovered Trouble, who, true to form, was the first kitten brave enough to investigate the newcomers. "Mom, look, can we keep one? Please." "Well," Ralph said, picking up Emma so she could safely see the kittens emerging from their hiding spots. "That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you all." Over dinner, the first family meal in his house since Martha's passing, Ralph laid out his proposal. "The kittens will be ready for new homes in a couple of weeks. Sarah, you mentioned Tommy's been asking for a pet, and Michael's girls have too, from what he tells me." Sarah looked at her father carefully. "Are you sure about this, Dad? Giving them away?" Ralph nodded, watching Lady groom Patches nearby. "I'm keeping Lady, of course, and maybe one of the others. But these little ones deserve families of their own. Young families." He smiled at Tommy, who was still entranced by the kittens. "Besides, this way you'll have to visit more often. Can't deny a grandfather the right to see his grandkids and grandkittens." That evening, as Tommy taught Emma gentle ways to pet the kittens and Sarah helped prepare their beds for the night, Ralph felt Martha's presence stronger than ever. She would have loved this, the house full of family, love, and laughter again. The next few weeks brought more changes. Michael's family visited to select their kitten, choosing Ghost, while Sarah's family fell in love with Trouble, a match Ralph found perfectly appropriate. The local veterinary assistant, charmed by Patches during a checkup, offered her a home. A young couple new to the neighborhood adopted Mittens. Ralph kept Socks, who had developed a habit of sleeping on Martha's side of the bed, right next to Lady. Shadow went to Mrs. Peterson next door, a peace offering that turned into a genuine friendship, with Ralph now invited over for weekly card games. "It's amazing what you've done," Sarah told him one evening during a video call, Trouble visible in the background chasing Tommy's toy cars. "You seem happier." "I am," Ralph replied simply, watching Lady and Socks curled up together in Martha's old reading chair. "Your mother always said everything happens for a reason. That stormy night when Lady showed up, I think that was Martha's doing. Her way of telling me it was time to live again." 3 months after Lady first appeared on his doorstep, Ralph Henderson's house had become a home again. Pictures of kittens with their new families joined the family photos on his walls. Weekly video calls kept him connected with his children and grandchildren, their conversations now filled with updates about their feline family members. The local shelter even asked him to foster other cats occasionally, recognizing his newfound talent for rehabilitation. One evening, as autumn again painted the trees golden, Ralph sat in his armchair with Lady in his lap and Socks sprawled across the armrest. The house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, but it no longer felt empty. Instead, it was filled with the echo of recent laughter, the promise of future visits, and the constant love of his furry companions. "You know what, Martha?" Ralph said softly to the quiet room, scratching Lady behind her ears. "You were right. Love does come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it even comes with whiskers and a tail." Lady's purr deepened, and Socks stretched out a paw to touch his hand. Outside, leaves danced in the October wind, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, reminding Ralph of another storm, not so long ago, that had brought him an unexpected gift. He smiled, feeling the warmth of tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, and though he wasn't sure whether he was thanking Martha, Lady, or some greater force that had brought them all together, He knew with certainty that he had found his way home again. In the growing dusk, Ralph Henderson sat contentedly in his chair, surrounded by the love he had thought lost forever, but had simply been waiting to be rediscovered in a new form. The grandfather clock struck 8, its chimes mixing with purrs and the rustling of autumn leaves, creating a symphony of life, love, and second chances. 1 year had passed since Lady first appeared on Ralph's doorstep. The autumn winds were picking up again, but this time, his home was far from empty. In fact, it had become something of a neighborhood hub. The shelter called again. Ralph told Lady as he prepared their breakfast. They've got another pregnant cat needing a foster home. Lady, now a dignified matron, looked up from her food bowl with what Ralph swore was an encouraging expression. Socks, ever the mama's boy, was too busy eating to comment. At 73, Ralph Henderson had become known as the Cat Whisperer in his small New England town. What had started with Lady had grown into a part-time calling. He'd fostered 3 more cats since her litter, helping them deliver and raise their kittens until they found permanent homes. His careful notes on each cat's preferences and personalities had become legendary at the local shelter. "You've given these cats something special," Dr. Williams had told him during their last visit. "Not just a house, but a home." The doorbell chimed. Saturday morning meant Tommy and Emma were here for their weekly visit with Grandpa and the cats. Sarah had started dropping them off while she ran errands, an arrangement that suited everyone perfectly. "Grandpa," Tommy burst in, now 9 and still full of energy. "Is it true you're getting another cat?" "Maybe," Ralph smiled, lifting Emma onto his lap. At 3, she was already showing signs of being as cat-crazy as her brother. "Want to help me get the spare room ready? Just in case?" As they prepared the room, Ralph found himself sharing stories about Martha with the children, something that had become easier with time. "Your grandmother would have loved this," he told them, watching Emma carefully arrange cat toys. "She always said a house needs children and pets to really be a home." Later that afternoon, after the children had left, Ralph sat at his computer responding to emails. Michael's daughters had sent new pictures of Ghost, who had apparently learned to open their refrigerator. Sarah reported that Trouble lived up to his name by teaching their new puppy bad habits. Mrs. Peterson frequently brought Shadow over for playdates with Lady and Socks. The computer dinged with a new message, this one from the local community college. They wanted him to speak to their veterinary technician students about his experiences fostering cats. Ralph chuckled, imagining what Martha would say about him becoming a guest lecturer at his age. "Life's full of surprises, isn't it?" he said to Lady, who had claimed her usual spot on his desk. She purred in agreement, watching as he typed his acceptance. That evening, as rain began to fall, Ralph heard a familiar sound, a cat's cry at his door, with Lady and Socks following close behind. He opened it to find a small calico huddled against the storm, her swollen belly promising new life to come. "Well?" Ralph smiled, feeling that same surge of purpose he'd first experienced with Lady. "Looks like we're about to start another adventure." He opened the door wider, welcoming both the cat and the changes she would bring. After all, he'd learned that the best things in life often arrive unexpectedly, on stormy nights when you least expect them. The grandfather clock struck 8, its chimes mixing with the sound of rain and purring cats, while somewhere, Ralph was sure, Martha was smiling. Winter had settled over New England, transforming Ralph's yard into a wonderland of white. Inside, the house was warm with life. The calico, whom he'd named Hope, had given birth to 4 healthy kittens just before Christmas. They now shared the space with Lady, Socks, and another rescue cat, a 3-legged tabby named Tripod who'd refused to leave after recovering from surgery. "We're running a proper cat sanctuary now," Ralph told Martha's picture one morning, adjusting it on the mantel where it sat surrounded by photos of cats and grandchildren. "But I think you knew this would happen all along." His 74th birthday brought an unexpected surprise. Sarah and Michael had organized a gathering, but not just a family. Former adopters of his foster kittens arrived with updates and photos. Dr. Williams came bearing news that the shelter wanted to name their new cat recovery room after him. Even his interview at the community college had led to a regular volunteer position, teaching students about caring for pregnant cats and newborns. "Dad," Michael said during the party, watching his own daughters playing with Hope's kittens. "Remember how you used to say you weren't sure what you'd do after retirement?" Ralph nodded, smiling as he watched Tommy showing younger children how to properly hold a kitten. The boy had developed a talent for working with cats that reminded Ralph of himself. "I think you've built something pretty special here," Michael continued. "These cats, they're not just pets. They're bringing people together." It was true. Ralph's home had become a gathering place for the community. Children would stop by after school to help socialize the kittens. Elderly neighbors found comfort in visiting with the cats, often sharing their own stories of loss and renewal. Even the local paper had run a feature about the Cat Man of Cedar Street and his mission to help homeless felines. "You know, Tommy asked me something interesting yesterday," Sarah said, joining them with Emma on her hip. "He wanted to know if he could be like Grandpa when he grows up, helping cats and making people happy." Ralph felt his eyes mist over. "Did he now?" "He did," Sarah smiled. "I told him that's a fine goal to have, that his grandmother would have been proud." That evening, after the guests had left, Ralph sat in his armchair, finally replaced with a new one that had room for multiple cats to join him. Lady claimed her usual spot on his lap, while Socks sprawled across the armrest. Hope's kittens tumbled nearby, supervised by their mother and the ever-vigilant Tripod. He thought about the past 18 months and all the changes they'd brought. The house that had once felt too big and empty was now perfectly sized for its purpose. The quiet that had haunted him had been replaced by the symphony of purrs, playful meows, and frequent laughter. His calendar, once blank save for doctor's appointments, now overflowed with shelter duties, student sessions, and family visits. "Martha," he whispered, watching the snow fall outside, "I finally understand what you meant about having a calling. Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it." The next morning brought another pregnant cat to his doorstep, as if drawn by some invisible beacon of hope. Ralph welcomed her in without hesitation, already planning where to put the birthing box. "Life's got a funny way of coming full circle," he told his new guest as she settled into the spare room. "One cat in a storm can change everything." Lady appeared in the doorway, now a matronly figure who helped care for each new arrival. She gave the newcomer a welcoming purr before turning to Ralph with those same knowing green eyes that had captured his heart that stormy night. I know, he chuckled, reaching down to scratch her ears. "You had it planned all along, didn't you?" Outside, winter winds whipped around the old house, but inside, love continued to multiply, one paw print at a time. The grandfather clock struck 8, its familiar chimes now accompanying a chorus of contented purrs, a reminder that home is not just a place, but a feeling, and family comes in all forms. In his heart, Ralph knew this wasn't an ending, but rather another beginning. Each new cat brought its own story, its own chance for healing, its own opportunity to spread the legacy of love that had started with one simple act of kindness on a stormy autumn night. And somewhere, Martha was definitely smiling.